guess we'll begin right now. Okay, so we've been learning the Gemara here on page 33a, and we turned the page yesterday to 33b, and we were dealing with the issue of hadassim that have some type of fruits that grow on them, some type of berry that David told us yesterday. Maybe it's even edible, and our Gemara is dealing with the fact that it's not hadar, it's not beautiful when it has these berries. And the Mishnah had said that if it's majority berries, it's invalid. If the Mishnah on 32b had said that it has some type of a fruit that grows on it, some type of berry or grape or date, different terms that the Gemara seems to use for this. So it says it's puzzle, it's invalid. However, if you remove them, then it would be usable. So the Gemara here on 33a, it went through two ways. It went through one understanding of Rav Chizda that he quoted Rav. Rav Chizda had quoted Rav about this type of a scenario where you do have these berries on top of the hadas, and they're majority. And the Mishnah had said it's invalid. So Rav Chizda quoted Rabbeinu Hagadol, which is Rav, famous Rav, that it's not always invalid. There are going to be times that it's kosher. When? He says, well, if it's all in one place, that's when the Mishnah says it's invalid. If it's spread out, it's okay. If it's spread out, it's valid. What would the reason be? Why does he say that? Why would it make a difference? Why would Rav Chizda is quoting Rav, that Rav says this qualification qualifies the rule of the Mishnah? The Mishnah said it's invalid. Comes along Rav and he says, not always. It's invalid if it's all in one area. You have majority berries. Again, how many leaves are on this hadas? Let's say you have 50 leaves. How many berries are on it? 52. So you got majority berries. It's invalid. Comes along Rav and he says, no, not always. If all the berries are in one area, that's when it's invalid. It's spread out throughout the hadas. You have 52 berries, but they're not all in one area. They're all spread out 2 or 3 places. So then it's not invalid. It's kosher. You could use that lulav. That lulav is going to be kosher. Rava doesn't. Rava comes along and he says, "This can't be." He says, if you have it in different places, then it's called speckled. It's a hadas menumer, like a leopard. It has a spot. It's spotted, and it's going to be invalid. Again, it's not hadar. It's not beautiful. So how is that going to be acceptable? That's also not going to be good. So how could Rav have said this, qualified the Mishnah this way? So the Gemara says, you know what? We have to say that Rav qualified the Mishnah to be in a certain scenario, and Rav Chizda quoted Rav, but there must be some difference between, there must be something wrong with the way it was quoted. And the Gemara comes up with a new version that this must be what he was saying. And what's the new version? The new version, the Gemara says, is Iyitmar Hachi Yitmar. If it was taught, it must have been this way. Again, and we're on 33b, and I'm just going over the Gemara here, the top of the page over here, that if Rav had said this qualification to the Mishnah, he must have said it a little differently, actually very differently. What is the new way of saying it? The new way is as follows. The Mishnah says it's invalid when you have too many berries. Again, we talked about a case. You have 50 leaves and 52 berries on this hadas, on this myrtle branch. So you got too many berries. It's majority berries. So you know what Rav comes along and he says? He says, this is going to be invalid, but only if they're black. they're green, it's not a problem. So the first way of Rav understanding Rav, the first version of Rav, the way the Gemara initially thought Rav said it, the Gemara understood there to be a difference if it's spread out or if it's in one place. The second version of qualification of Rav is that there's a difference what the color of these berries are. Are the berries black or are they green? So let's think about these two versions of Rav's way of qualifying the Mishnah. Let's just think. So what would the reason be? Again, you have all of them in one place. It's going to be invalid. All the 52 berries and there are 50 leaves. So the first version of Rav is, nope, that's not going to be, that's where the Mishnah says it's puzzle, it's invalid because they're in one makam echad, they're in one place. But if they were spread out a little, 2 or 3 places, then it will be kosher. Now, why would it be kosher if it's spread out in different places? What would the reason be? So there are 2 understandings, it seems, why this should work. Why it, in other words, how to explain this. One of the understandings is that if they're all in one place, then you could see that it's so many berries. It's majority berries than leaves. If they're spread out, it doesn't look like that they're majority. So what it boils down to is that in lulav and esrog, there's a lot to do with how it looks, not necessarily exactly how it is, but how it looks. Where do we see such an idea? You see such an idea when it comes to all the other imperfections, that a lot of them have to do with how it looks, not just how if you use a magnifying glass, you might see things differently. But the way it looks is what we go by. So here also, maybe that would be the understanding of Rav, where he says this rule that he says if it's all in one place, that's where the Mishnah is talking about that it's invalid. If it's spread out a little, you have 2, 3 different places where it has a bunch of berries, you don't know so clearly that it's majority berries. It's not overwhelming. It's not overwhelmingly convincing that it's majority berries. And therefore, you could say it's kosher. That's one understanding of the first version of Rav. Another understanding is a little different, and this is very interesting because it really ties into another concept here. And it touches upon what David mentioned about the fact that these fruits are maybe considered like fruits. What do I mean? If they're all in one place, if all the berries are in one area, so then what happens is you look at this fruit, you look at this branch, and you say, this is a fruit branch. This is like meant to give fruit because you have all these fruits all in one place. This is called an eitz pri. This is not called an eitz avos, a braided branch. It's called a fruit. It's a fruit branch. This is like it has a different. The goal of this bush is different now. It becomes, and the branch is no longer a branch that's braided. You don't call it a branch that's braided. This is a fruit branch. So it's a branch of a fruit tree. It's an eitz pri. It's like a fruit tree. And so the Torah uses the term eitz avos, anaf eitz avos, which we understood to mean that like the leaves make it look braided, in some sense that it has a certain look to it, that it's braided. But if it has so many fruits in one place, you're going to change the term is going to be it would no longer be called an eitz anaf eitz avos, this braided branch. It would look, it's more like a tree fruit, more like a branch for a tree branch, a fruit branch. And therefore Rav would say that the only time it's invalid is if it's all in one place. If it's spread out, you still see a lot of braids, and you don't see that amount of fruit in one place, so then we could still call it an eitz avos. In such a scenario, you'd be able to consider it a braided branch because they're spread out. The fruits are not all in one place. So then you look at the whole branch, and now you see there's a lot of braids. So it gives a different it's a different rule. It would be permissible then. You would be able to use it. So that would be the other understanding, possibly, of Rav. And now comes along Rava, and Rava says it can't be that. You can't explain it that way because you're going to have a problem of menumer. You're going to have a problem that it's speckled. You have these different places. It's you have fruits that are you have the fruit here, fruit there. It's spread out. That's not a reason why it should be acceptable. It's menumer apostle. It should be that this would be considered menumer. Now here, interestingly enough, Rashi comes on the top Rashi and he says, you know why it's going to be considered speckled? Rashi jumps to this idea that the berries are black and the Olin, the leaves, are green. Now, the Gemara hasn't yet mentioned this point. That's the next piece of Gemara. But Rashi jumps to explain the menumer aspect of it. It's not just because you have berries and you have leaves, and the berries make it somehow considered more speckled. No, it has to do with the fact that the berries are colored. The fact that the berries have a different color, that is why we're going to call it a speckled, so it's going to always be invalid. And therefore, the Gemara has to come up with a new version of Rav. We have to explain Rav differently. So the first version of Rav tried to differentiate between where the berries are and they all in one place, they're spread out. The Gemara didn't like that differentiation because the Gemara says, because Rava says, what do you mean? If spread out, it's also a problem. Problem is it's considered menumer. It's going to be considered that it's speckled, and therefore it won't be kosher. And so the Gemara says, you know what we have to say? That if Rav was making some type of qualification for the Mishnah, he must have been qualifying when it's colored, when the berries are black color, or when they are green color. When they're green color, so then it would be kosher. The Mishnah is talking about a case where they're black, they're not kosher. And that would be a way of differentiating, of qualifying the Mishnah. So again, the first way of understanding it seemingly was that why should it be a problem to have berries? The first way of understanding it, berries are black. They make it not hodder, not beautiful. The Gemara wanted to say, well, if they're spread out, it's not a problem. Rava says, no, then it's speckled. So then the Gemara says, no. So it must be that Rav's differentiation was if they are green, it's kosher. They're black, it's not kosher. And the question is, so what happens when you have some of these berries that are black, but it's not majority? What's the law going to be? If it's not majority, what would the law be? Mishnah said, on 32b, the Mishnah had said that if the anavav merubais me'olav, the berries are more than the leaves, then it is puzzle, it is invalid. And if you minimize them in miaton, you made them less, it is kosher, it is kosher. Does it say you took them all off? No, you made them less. If they were initially less, it's also kosher. If you make them less, it's kosher. What happens when you have a few berries that are black? What's the law going to be?
Okay.
It's kosher. Why? Isn't it speckled?
Well, it doesn't have that appearance if it's only a few of them.
So, okay, so we go by majority. So we're going to say that because it's a minority, that's going to allow it to be considered not speckled. So in other words, it's sort of like buttle. They're nullified. This is what Jeffrey is basically saying, that when you have a small amount, we could say that they're nullified. Now, another explanation that's given is that when you have a small amount, you have the ability, we consider it as if they are removed. Now, why? Because you could remove them. When you have a lot, you could also remove them. Yeah, but when you have a lot, we don't consider it that way. It's only when they're a small amount, we consider it as if they're not there, because you have the ability to remove them. They're not part of the kashrus of the hadas. They're not part of the source of making the myrtle kosher. They're not necessary, and therefore we're able to remove them, and it's fine. Now, so that would be the understanding here, that somehow they are nullified. If it's a majority of these anovim, majority of these berries, then it's a problem. Because what happens is then the leaves of the hadas are sort of nullified to the berries. But if it's majority leaves and a minority berries, so it's like the berries are nullified to the leaves. We call it a myrtle branch rather than a a branch of a fruit tree or something. So in other words, the bottom line is that it's not as beautiful as we would like it to be, but it's going to be kosher because we are able to consider it as if it's not speckled. We consider it as if it's it does. We don't consider these berries significant. Now, the thing we started discussing yesterday was the problem with learning the Gemara, where the Gemara seems to leave vague what happens when these berries are different colors.
Yeah.
Let me mute everyone here. Second. So the Gemara had said, almost like a contradiction. The Gemara says, you know when it's a problem? When the berries are black. You know when it's not a problem? When the berries are green. What about all the other colors? The Gemara leaves it vague. What would the halacha be if they were, by different colors? The Gemara then discusses, what about red? And the Gemara says, well, red is really similar to black. And that's an interesting thing, that the Gemara brings a similarity to blood, that blood turns black. And therefore, black is considered the same color as red, because black really used to be red. And so we struggled a little with how does that law regarding the laws of Nida, how does that connect to the laws of Hadas that have to be how it looks? By regarding the laws of Nida, it's more of, what is it? Is it blood from the uterus, or is it blood from from a cut? So with the laws of Nida, we could understand the Gemara there, that the black is really red, and therefore don't judge it based on the fact that it doesn't look like it's blood from the uterus because it's not that color. No, it used to be that color. Now it got changed. That I understand over there in the laws of Nida, the rule regarding blood, but regarding the laws of Hadas, why should the black and red have anything to do with each other? Just because regarding the laws of, because blood turns black, that doesn't mean that has nothing to do with a hadas The fact that a berry is black or red, well, why should that change any law regarding the kashrus of a hadas? So I mentioned to you that it seemed that there is an understanding here, according to the Avnei Nezer, that he wants to say that red is really not invalid. Me'ikar hadin, from the essential law, the essence, the real law is that black is what's the problem. And the Mishnah said that when you have these berries, if they're majority and they're black, it's invalid. That's where it's a real problem. What happens if it's red? So comes along Rav Papa and he says, you know what? We are machmir. We are strict. We're stringent regarding the laws of red because red is going to ultimately turn into black, just like regarding the blood of a nida, that the blood turns black. So the same thing is these berries that are red, they actually turn black, and it's going to turn black. And therefore, we prohibit you from using the hadassim that have too many berries if the berries are in the state of red, because red is in the mid state of becoming ripe. And therefore, it would be a problem because they're going to ultimately become ripe and they'll become black. And so just like blood turns black, so these and we consider them the same halacha. So he says similarly, we consider red to be just like it's black, and we prohibit you from using these hadassim. And I gave an example yesterday that it's one of those cases where the rabbis prohibited something that's really kosher and acceptable, but they prohibited it because it's going to lead you to possibly doing the mitzvah wrong or not being able to fulfill the mitzvah. And one of the examples that I gave was a sukkah made out of an animal, with an animal being used as a wall. The animal might go away, and therefore it would make the sukkah invalid, and you might end up eating there and might not have a sukkah for the rest of sukkahs. And so basically the rabbis prohibited such a sukkah. We also had a similar example. A few weeks ago, we had a case where a person has too big of an esrog. If the esrog is too big and we're afraid he's going to pass it from his hand, the right hand to the left hand, so he could hold the lulav in the right hand and the esrog in the left hand, and he's going to end up, if it's so big and he's not going to be able to hold two things at once, he's going to end up, if it's switching hands, it'll end up falling. Then what's going to happen? The esrog will become invalid. Okay, so what? So with the rabbis, so what's wrong with having too big of an esrog? So the esrog will become invalid. The rabbi said, no, we are not allowing you to use such a big esrog because it might get invalid later, and then you're going to be stuck and not have another esrog for sukkah. So in other words, the rabbi sort of prohibited things as a means of people not messing up their ability to fulfill the mitzvah. So here also, the red might end up turning black, and first of all, it might be that a person might not realize it and it'll be invalid, or additionally, a person might not have another lulav, won't be able to get a dasim. And therefore, the rabbis prohibited red berries if there are too many of them, because they're going to turn black. Although I must say it is interesting that the rabbis did that, because you could always take them off. You always do have an option. It's not like you're not going to be able to remove them. You could always remove them. So because of that question, I think here you have to say that according to the way the Avnei Nezer is understanding it, the problem is that we're afraid you're not going to realize that they're black. You're not going to, you're going to end up using it in an invalid way. And that's going to be the problem. You're going to end up not fulfilling the mitzvah.
So I'm a little concerned. If you have a minute. Rav Papa is also the one who says there's no dichui on the other side. So he is saying you can't use this, but it's not a dichui. It's not something that invalidates from the start. So if that's the case, then why can't you just use it the first day, and then, well, tomorrow if it starts to get black, I'll take it off.
Right. So he's not prohibiting it because of dichui. He's prohibiting it, similar to having too big of an esrog, and similar to having a sukkah that has an animal as the wall. He's prohibiting it for those type of reasons, that it's like a type of decree that the rabbis made in order for you to fulfill the mitzvah properly.
It's a very narrow difference from saying
From dichui.
yes.
From dichui, that you're saying dichui is a similar idea.
Yes.
Well, not really. Dichui is more of a it's like some type of a rule that the once something is pushed off is pushed off. It's almost like not logical. This is logical. The dichui is not a logical law. I see them as very different. I see dichui as being sort of like once it's invalid, somehow Hashem doesn't want that object, or it's sort of like
true. You can't make the esrog smaller, but you can't take the berries. You can't make the esrog smaller.
Smaller.
I agree. But you can take the berries off, and it could, even if it's red today, you could take it off before it gets black. And the only problem would be today if he's talking about the first day.
So that's why I mentioned that there's really two parts. There's two aspects to these type of decrees. One is that you won't know and you'll end up doing it wrong. And the other is you might end up stuck with no way to fulfill the mitzvah. So the second aspect, that you might end up stuck and you won't be able to fulfill the mitzvah, does not apply here. But the first one does apply here, where you won't know that the red turned black, and therefore it would be, and therefore, because of that, the rabbi said, don't use red. Because you're gonna make your lulav on Erev Pesach, Erev Sukkot, and you're gonna tie it together and have it all ready. Then the next day comes, and you're gonna jump out of bed and say, "I want to shake my lulav and esrog." You're gonna run and shake it, and you're gonna end up saying the bracha, and you're not gonna look and see that it's black. And therefore, let me just mute everyone. And therefore, the rabbi said you can't use red. So that's the Avnei Nezer's explanation. Now, I want to share with you other ways of understanding this Gemara. But the Avnei Nezer, the reason I like the Avnei Nezer's pshat is because it gives a little similarity to the law of Nida, where red turns black, and just like over there, we say that the blood is considered tamei. The woman is considered tamei because the blood is black, because it initially was red. So here also, we are concerned that the red is going to end up becoming black, and that's the way the color red does turn black with time. With blood, and the same thing is with these hadat. The same thing applies to these hadassim, and therefore we are going to be concerned that it will turn black and it will be invalid. And it also explains why Rav Papa only, why Rav would have only used the word shchayros and he didn't mention red, because he was talking about the main law, that the main law is only black. Red is like an addition to that law. The halacha is that black is invalid. Red would be so. Therefore, that's why. So that the Avnei Nezer's pshat gives an understanding, because he was talking from the main law is only that black is invalid. The red is only like an addition, like a protection, like an add-on. Okay, but that's one way of learning. Now the other way of learning here, the other way of understanding this is as follows. When the leaves are black, what's the problem? What's the problem when the leaves are black? So the way Rashi understands it, the problem is that it's speckled. However, there is another way of understanding it, and that is,
aren't we saying the berries are black, not the leaves?
The berries, excuse me, the berries. When the berries are black, so one of the understandings is that it has, it's not hadar, it's not beautiful. That's the way Rashi understood it, and therefore, it would be invalid. When they're green, it's not a problem. That's the color of the hadassim. The other way of understanding it is no. The problem with black is not that it now looks speckled and doesn't match and doesn't fit. The problem is that now it's a fruit. Similar to what we explained earlier, that once it's a fruit, it loses its term anaf eitz avos. This is no longer a braided branch. This is an anaf eitz pri. This is a branch of fruit, because the black is when the fruit is basically ripe. It's nigmar pri. The fruit has been completed its growth, and so therefore, once the berries are black, it no longer has the term hadas, which is anaf eitz avos. You can't call it an anaf eitz avos anymore. It's called an eitz pri. And this is spelled out in the Gemara Yushalmi, this pshat. Gemara Yushalmi learns like this, that it says in the Yushalmi that the problem with when it's black is because it's nigmar pri, nigmar period. This is something from the Yushalmi. So if you learn it that way, what comes out is that green means it's not a fruit yet. Black means it's already a fruit. Other colors basically are not fruits unless they're considered ripe. But any other color, whenever it's not yet, in other words, the problem is not the speckled. The problem that the way the new version of Rav that Rav Chisda is quoting is that the problem is when they're black, but basically any other color is not ripened yet. It's not ripened yet. It's not a problem of being of eitz, not an eitz avos. It's still an eitz avos. It's still a branch that's braided, because the main thing is the leaves. The fruit is not ripe yet. It hasn't ripened yet. And on that, the Gemara says, Rav Papa comes along and he says that, red and black really go together. Red and black go together. They are, part of the same color. And therefore, if it's not black, but it's red, it's also a problem. It's considered that the fruits are basically, it's considered a fruit already. And black is considered red. And the problem with black is that it's red, and therefore it would be considered a fruit. Now, what comes out from this is anytime that it's really considered ripe, that's where it's a problem. Any other, for some reason, the berry is a different color, it wouldn't be a problem. It's not a fruit. It's only when it's ripened. It's when it's a fruit. And on this, the Gemara says red and black are both problems. That's considered a fruit. Red is the beginning of the ripening. Black is the conclusion of the ripening. But it's basically the fruit is considered a fruit now, and therefore we're going to consider this anaf eitz not an anaf eitz avos. We're going to consider it an anaf eitz pri, and it's not going to be acceptable. So that would be the other way of understanding this Gemara, that it's that the what the main color, what is the main issue here? Is it the fact that only green is what's kosher? Any other color should be invalid? Or is it only black is what's invalid? Any other color should be valid. So it boils down to what's called a fruit and what's not a fruit. What's considered ripened, what's not considered ripe. What's considered like a fruit. Okay, but that basically covers this Gemara. I must say it's only a few lines of Gemara, but it's packed with discussion because of the vagueness of the statements. Rav Papa is just saying black and green. He leaves out any other options, and and he, at least Rav Chisda says black and green, and then Rav Papa then adds on this point about adumais keshchayros damyon, and he quotes Rav Chanina. So anyway, that's a little discussion over here among the commentaries, and it boils down to it does boil down to halacha, depending on what the reason is. If the reason has to do with speckles, then maybe other colors should also be a problem. And if the reason has to do with ripening, then black is what the problem. Black and red is where it's a problem. Now, it really boils down to what the main reason of this problem of all of the anavov of the berries. What's the problem with berries? Is it because of the fact that it's speckled? So then only green should be kosher. Other colors are called speckled. If the problem is that it's about ripening, then only black should be a problem. That's what it seems to boil down to, and these are different ways of understanding it. Okay, so then we have the next Gemara. Actually, before the next Gemara, we did have a Tosfos over here. Tosfos over here says that he comes up with an interesting way of. Tosfos says that, the Gemara seemed to jump from one version of Rav to another version of Rav. And it's quite different. He says, if you switch one thing around, you could actually keep the original wording of Rav and it would sound pretty good. He says, why doesn't the Gemara do that? He says, what could the Gemara have said? So he says the initial version of Rav was problematic because the version said that if all of the berries are in one place, that's when it's invalid. If the berries are spread out in 2 or 3 places, then it's kosher. That was the initial version. Mark didn't like that because then it's speckled. He says, if you want, you could take Rav's statement and put it not on these words of the Mishnah, but you could really put it on the other words of the Mishnah. So Rav's wording is pretty much going to stay the same. He's going to make the same differentiation between one place or 3 places. And instead of it being on when you have too many berries, it's invalid, put it on if you remove the berries, it is valid. On that statement, put these words. So again, the Mishnah had said that if you remove the berries, miaton, it's going to be kosher. If you minimize the berries, it'll be kosher. So on that, Rav could have said, when does that apply? That only applies when they're in one place, that if you make them less, it will be acceptable. But if they're in many places, they're in different places, then it's going to be speckled. So if it's only in one place, it's okay. But if it would be in many places, it's not okay. So that's what Tosfos says, really the Gemara could have come up with such an idea that speckled, if it's in a few places, that's when it's speckled. But if it's all in one place and you remove them, you minimize them, and they're now just in one place, then it's going to be okay. But Tosfos says the reason the Gemara doesn't say that is because initially, he says that the Gemara holds speckled would be a problem, whether it's one place or whether it's 3 places. The Gemara seems to understand that that's a problem. And therefore, it doesn't want to accept this type of a change. And that's why the Gemara doesn't answer it this way. Because really, all type of speckled would be considered a problem. So again, that's Tosfos had a interesting insight of how to maybe explain that, how the Gemara could have answered it, but he says this is the reason the Gemara doesn't answer it, because it's not only when it's in 2 or 3 places that it's considered speckled. Even if it's in one place, that would be a problem of speckled. Therefore, the Gemara doesn't differentiate between one place or three places in the end. Basically makes it depends if it's black or if it's green. Okay, so that's the top Tosfos over there. And now we're going to review the next piece. Although actually, I'm just thinking one more point, and that is that in previous Gemara we had Rav Chisda, where he quoted Rav, and he says, "Hamakam yeh be'ezroi." Hashem should help him. What is that? Why is the Gemara? What does that mean? The Gemara that he says those terms. Hashem should be in his help. So it seems that this is a term that he used as a way of respect. Like when you say, quote someone, and then you say, "Soll sein gesund," he should be well. So it seems like he was quoting him, meaning he wasn't there. Rav wasn't there, but he's still alive. And therefore, he's saying, "Makam yeh be'ezra," Hashem should help him. So, based on that, the Gemara says that it must be that Rav Chisda is quoting Rav when Rav was still alive, and he says, "Makam yeh be'ezra," because you wouldn't use that term if Rav had passed away already. Now, Rava was born after Rav had passed away, so the Gemara understands. The Gemara says, Rav, if Rav Chisda quoted Rav and he said, "Amakam yeh be'ezra," so when Rava is quoting, is saying this, it can't be that it's Amar Lei that Rava's telling Rav Chisda this. It must be that Rava's just saying this, because if Rava was telling this, in other words, the Girsa is they want to change the version that you shouldn't word it that it's Amar Le Rava, it's just Amar Rava. And the reason why they say that is because it must be that Rava was not saying this in front of Rav Chisda, because it's impossible that Rav Chisda would have said this line after his Rebbe passed away, and if Rava was right there, it would have been after his Rebbe Rav passed away. So the commentaries, interestingly enough, they don't always get into the historical background. Here, the Aruch LaNer and the other commentaries, the Bach, they get into the history, the how it could be, could because of those words, they understand that Rav Chisda must have said this many years earlier. And Rava just said the statement that statement of Rav Chisda must be, so not like he was talking to Rav Chisda, must have just said that statement doesn't sound properly, that we have the right tradition on how that statement is. So that's the history here of historical background of or the time when this was said. Okay, so now comes the next Gemara. We're on 33b, Imiaton Kosher. Miaton kosher is by the two dots in the Gemara, and it's about 8 lines, must be 8 lines from the top of the page. In miaton kosher, if you made them less, if you removed some of those berries, it's going to be kosher. The hadas will be kosher. So the Gemara asks, when did you remove these berries that it's going to be kosher? So Gemara says, if you remove them before that, you made a bundle out of them before you bound them together, the liagde, that you bound it together, so you removed it before that. Pshita, it is obvious that it's going to be kosher, because you don't have the problem that we've been talking about for the last few days of tasev, that it has to be that you have to make it in a kosher way, and you have to put it together in a way that it starts out being kosher, and not that you fix something later and somehow correct it after the fact that it's bound together. No, you first fixed it. You removed the extra berries, and then you put it in. Then you bound it together with the lulav and the willows and the aravos. So if that's the case, pshita, it is obvious that it's kosher. There's no question. You did nothing wrong. How could it be a problem? Ella, rather, it must be talking about lebasar deliagde. It must be that you remove these berries after you had bound it together with the lulav. And what do we see from there? Obviously, there's no rule of tasav loymena asui, that there's no problem with fixing it later. That's for sure not a problem, because we're saying it's kosher. Miata is kosher. If you removed some of the berries, you made it kosher. What do you mean? How could you remove them after? I already bound it in with the lulav. No, the answer is that the law of tasav loymena asui, they have to do things and make it in a kosher way at first. The first time around, that doesn't apply to lulav. It applies to sukkah because it says chag sukkah is taseh luchot taseh b'loy asui, but it doesn't apply to lulav. We don't learn lulav from sukkah. Fine, that's okay. But what else do we see here? But we also see dichui meikarahu, that here you have a case that you bound it together while it had too many berries, and then you remove the berries after you bound it, and then that is going to be kosher. That shows us dichui meikara, that something was pushed aside because you bound it and it's not kosher, and now it was pushed aside. You couldn't use it for the mitzvah, and now you're fixing it afterwards. And were you able to use it? Tivshay mina. Let us answer from this. Dichui meikara lehavi dichui, that when something is pushed aside initially, it is not considered a problem. It's not pushed aside. We allow you to use it afterwards when it comes to a mitzvah. There's a law by kodshim, by korbanos, by sacrifices. There is such a law that once something is not eligible to be used for a korban, we say don't use it afterwards. Like it's almost like there's some spiritual problem with it. We can't accept it. But here, something wasn't able to be used for the mitzvah. Now it's possible to use that. Then it becomes okay. Then it's kosher. So we see from here that it's okay that by a mitzvah you can do that, because why are you able to use this hadas if it was bound in a way that was inappropriately, and then you fix it afterwards, but initially it already was not kosher. It was dochui. It was pushed aside from the mitzvah. You couldn't use it. And now you're able to use it. So the Gemara says, liyoilam, really, basar diagde. You really, the case is, as we have just explained, that as you said, that it should be that we must be talking about a case that after you bound it, that's when you removed the berries. Because savar, but the author of the Mishnah holds, eged is hasmana bialma. Binding it together is only a preparation to fulfill the mitzvah. The hasmana bialma lav klumhu. In preparation of binding it for the mitzvah, that is not considered an issue where if it's not valid, then we call it dachui. No, because it's just a preparing. You just prepared it. It's not like the mitzvah of lulav is on this now. Oh, the mitzvah of lulav is on this, but it's dachui, but you can't use it. And then we're gonna say, well, now you fixed it, and now you're gonna use it. Oh, we see dachui works. No, you don't see that. Because here you didn't really do the mitzvah. It's not the time of the mitzvah yet. It's still before the holiday began. And all you did was you bound it together. That's only a hazmana. That's only a preparation for the lulav, and therefore you can't say that it's called dochui. This is not called dochui. It's not called pushed aside yet, because the time of the mitzvah didn't kick in yet. It's before the holiday kicked in, and the time of the mitzvah didn't start yet, and therefore we're not going to call it a dochui, a case where the mitzvah was pushed aside. All you did was you bound it together. That's all that is a hazmana, as a preparation for the mitzvah.
So we have a problem then.
What's the problem?
The rabbis say if you took the berries off when it was Yom Tov already, you still can use it.
Okay, so let's see, because the Gemara is going to bring this. We're going to soon see some similar to what you're quoting. So ve'ein mamatin b'yom tov. So the Gemara now says you're not allowed to remove them on Yom Tov. Gemara says ha'avar b'likton mai. What would be the law if you did remove them on Yom Tov? So the Gemara says kosher, or the Gemara says over v'likton. What would the din be? And the Gemara says kosher. It is kosher. Now, what would how does the Gemara know that? Avar v'likton, what's the din? The Gemara says kosher. How do you see that from the Mishnah? The Mishnah said you can't remove it on Yom Tov. And if you did remove it on Yom Tov, the Gemara says it must be that it's kosher. How do you see that? How would you know that if you removed it on Yom Tov, that it's going to be kosher? So the answer is that if it would not be kosher, if it would be invalid to use, then it wouldn't be a problem to remove it on Yom Tov. It would say if you removed it on Yom Tov, it's invalid. But there's no problem to you. There's no problem to remove it. Why? Because you didn't fix it. What's the problem of removing it on Yom Tov? It's called fixing a kli. If you can't use it, it's not a kli. You fixed it, but it's not a valid vessel. So therefore, the Gemara says, if you're not allowed to remove it on Yom Tov, it must be that if you did remove it, if you did remove those berries, the extra berries, you removed them, then it actually would be valid for a lulav. And then you would be called, you were masaking a kli, you fixed the vessel, and therefore it would be that it must be that it's kosher. If it would not be kosher, you can't say, there's nothing wrong with removing them on Yom Tov, because you didn't fix anything, because you're not going to be able to use it, because it's not going to be kosher. It must be that it is kosher. So that's the Gemara says. Over v'likton, but if you did, what's the law? Kosher. The Gemara says it must be that it's kosher. The Gemara says the ashcher emas. When did they become black? Ilema the ashcher meyasmo. If they became again, this is based on the previous Gemara that we mentioned that when they're black, that's when it's a problem. And there's a majority berries over leaves. So you have, let's say, 52 berries in 50 leaves, and therefore, and they're black. When did they become black? The ashkar emas. Ilema, if you want to say, the ashkar meyesmo, they became black from the day before Yom Tov. Erev Yom Tov, they were black already. So now it was invalid. Again, you have too many berries, and you went and they're too many berries and they're black. So let's say they're black already before Yom Tov. So then you have, the Gemara says, Dichoy me'ikaruhu. This is a case where they already are black when Yom Tov enters, and you would say that it's dachoy, it is pushed aside from the beginning, because once Yom Tov enters, you're unable to use this because there's too many berries that are black. The Gemara says, Tifshay mina, that let us answer from this that dichoy meikara deloy havi dichoy, that you see that it's not a problem, because you're even though it became black before Yom Tov, and now Yom Tov enters and it's invalid, nevertheless, what's going to be the halacha? That if you remove them, it's going to be kosher. So you see that even something that's pushed aside is not a problem. You can still use it for a mitzvah. This is, this is a continuation of what we've been seeing in the past few days about the concept of dichoy, something that's pushed off from doing a mitzvah with it. Are you able to still do a mitzvah if that problem is removed, is resolved? So if you resolve that problem, can you still use it for a mitzvah? We know kudshim doesn't work that way. You can't. Once a carbon is not usable, it's not.
But the kisui hadam, we said it was.
What is that?
The kisui hadam, were able to do that.
So, right. So kisui hadam was one example that we tried to prove from. And the case of case of Kisri Adam that we brought initially to prove that you see that you could still cover the blood even after the wind was pushed aside. That was the question the Gemara tried to use as a way of proving it, and the Gemara said that that's true, that you see that you're able to, but there the Gemara says maybe that was a case of just a chumrah. We don't have clarity if that's the final halacha. It could just be that you recover it if the wind blew off the earth and you recover it, because as a chumrah we say maybe dichoy is not a dichoy. Maybe the fact that it was pushed aside, but we don't have clarity from that. That wasn't a good enough proof. That just said that if you can be machmir, you should redo it. So here the Gemara is trying to say that it seems like maybe we have a proof here that it really is acceptable to do something after it's pushed aside. And the Gemara says, no, elalav de ashru b'yomtiv. Rather, maybe you'll have to say that it's must have gotten black. These grapes got black on Yom Tov. So the Gemara says if they got black on Yom Tov, and before Yom Tov they were kosher, so then you have a case of nira v'nidchu. There it was fit, nira, it was fit, v'nidchahu, and then it was pushed aside. So shamet mino, we see from here, nira v'nidcha v'choizer v'nira, that even though something was pushed aside after it was fit, you're able to use it. So this is what the Gemara is understanding, that you however you're going to learn, you seem to be able to answer part of our question about the law of dichui, because either it was pushed aside, either the mitzvah was pushed aside right from the beginning of Yom Tov, or the mitzvah was pushed aside on Yom Tov after it was already acceptable to use. Then the mitzvah got pushed aside on Yom Tov. So either way, we seem to have some type of a proof about dichui, either dichui me'ikara or nira v'nidcha. Again, there's two elements to dichui. One is where it was pushed aside in the beginning, and the other is where it's pushed aside after it's already eligible, it gets pushed aside. Now, when it gets pushed aside after it's eligible, that is more of a reason to say it's ineligible afterwards. Because it was once eligible, it got pushed aside, forget it. But the other case is more of a reason to say maybe it could be kosher. It was never eligible in the first place. It was pushed aside right when Yom Tov entered, right at the beginning. It was not eligible. But now something got resolved, and now it's eligible. So now we never really pushed it aside. It just wasn't eligible in the first place. So here the Gemara says, you want to say this way? Okay, say the other way. You want to say the other way? Then it shows nira v'nidcha. Either way, you're going to have some type of a proof. The Gemara says, nira v'nidchahu. Shamet mina nira v'nidcha chayzer v'nira. You see from here that a dichoy, that's nira, that it was once visible, once acceptable, meaning it was once acceptable for the mitzvah, and then it got pushed aside. Chayzer v'nira, you can then go back, and once it's resolved, it can be used afterwards for a mitzvah. The Gemara answers, loy. No, the oilam really, the ashur me'ikara, really, it got black from the beginning Erev Yom Tov. Dichoy meikara, delay havi dichoy tifshet mina. So we can answer. We're going to use this to show that something that was once pushed aside from the beginning, before it was ever eligible, that you could still use afterwards. Once it's resolved, once the issue is resolved, we could answer. We could say that that's loy havi dichu. But this we can't answer. We aren't able to answer the other aspect of something that was nira v'nidcha. It was usable, and then it got pushed aside, and then we want to resolve that problem, and then now use it, and now to bring it back in and allow it to be used. That we don't have an answer for. We're not sure if we would learn this from Kodshim or not. We don't know if we would learn mitzvahs from Kodshim, and we would say that the same law that applies to Kodshim would apply here. That we don't know. But dichoy meikara, that's layavi dichoy. So now what comes out is that the Gemara before had left a teku, that only applies to half of the question, not to the entire question. As their law of dichoy by mitzvahs, it only applies to nira v'nidcha type not to the dichui me'ikara type. Okay, we're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone.
But really, there's other issues too, because you study in Beitzah, then and you call this likton, so it has nothing to do with dichui. It has to do with whether you can pick the fruit, right? Which is nolad.
So you're bringing in a concept of noilad, which yes, it does talk about in Gemara Beya, but the issue of noilad is you're asking that it should be considered an issue of muktzah. That noilad would be if it's an issue of muktzah.
But you can't use it. They don't use the word decoy there, but you can't use it.
Right.
And the other part before him, we were saying it's not valid because it's a fruit now, and we're not supposed to have a hadassah that has fruit on it. It's just the leaves, and you use the word likton, which is like a harvest word. It's
right.
It's
the thing is that, I mean, if you think about it, the Gemara there is not really talking about this type of scenario, because if you have a fruit that's not ripe when Yom Tov enters, and it becomes ripe on Yom Tov, are you not allowed to use it because of noilad? Noilad is also, you're not allowed to use it. It doesn't apply to, you wouldn't say that. The point is over there talking about an egg that was the beitza noilda,
but it was prepared before.
It was attached to the tree, and then you cut it off.
Yes, so this is likton. That's why I'm saying that. Yes, exactly. Because
yeah, but likton but the root, the branch is not attached to the ground.
No,
you're just plucking it off. If you have bananas that are attached to the other bananas, likton. I harvested the banana from the other bananas. I have my apple has a little
very
thing
good, very good. But why does it use that word though?
Why doesn't it use what word? The decoy? Why does it use
likton? Why does it pick another verb?
Because you are picking it off. You are picking it off. It is the right word. It's just not attached to the ground. It's already been harvested. So it doesn't really apply the laws of
okay. So then that's the answer to why the rabbi says machshirin.
All right. Anyways, sei gesund, everyone.
Have a
wonderful day.
It's really very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.